All right, so let's move on to the Pantoum. Okay, so the Pantoum at a glance, that's on page 43. And these are the rules. So number 1, each stanza must be 4 lines long. The Pantoum must begin and end with the same line. The second and fourth lines of the first quatrain become the first and third lines of the next, and so on. And a quatrain is a stanza of 4 lines, just so you know. Rhyming of each quatrain is A, B, A, B. And I'll explain this to you when we start looking at the first stanza of the poem. It's referring to the end sound of each line, right? So like hat and cat rhyme and make and take rhyme. So if it was like one line ends with hat, the next line ends with make, the next line ends with cat, and the next line ends with take, that would be an A-B pattern, okay? The final quatrain, and again, a quatrain is a stanza of 4 lines. The final quatrain changes this pattern. In the final quatrain, the first and third lines are used in reverse as second and fourth lines. Okay, so in the poem by Nellie Wong, which is called Grandmother's Song, and that one starts on page 50. We're going to look at the first 2 stanzas and see how each stanza has 4 lines, so each is a quatrain, and we're going to look at what the repetitions are. So, grandmothers sing their song, blinded by the sun's rays, grandchildren for whom they long, for pomelo golden days. A pomelo is a fruit, kind of like a grapefruit. Blinded by the sun's rays, gold bracelets, opal rings, for pomelo golden days, tiny fingers, ancient things. All right, so notice how the second and the fourth lines of stanza 1 repeat in stanza 2 as the first and third lines, right? So blinded by the sun's rays, that's the second line in the first stanza. It becomes the first line in the following stanza, right? And for pomelo golden days, which is the last line of stanza 1, that becomes the third line of stanza 2, all right? So let's go to the next page. All right, so grandmothers sing their song, blinded by the sun's rays, grandchildren for whom they long, for pomelo golden days. Blinded by the sun's rays, gold bracelets, opal rings, for pomelo golden days, tiny fingers, ancient things. So now we go and look at the third stanza. What's going to happen? Gold bracelets, opal rings, sprinkled with Peking dust, tiny fingers, ancient things, so young they'll never rust. So again, we have the second and fourth lines of stanza 1 becoming lines 1 and 3 in stanza 2, and then the second and fourth lines of stanza 2 become, guess what? Lines 1 and 3 in stanza 3. And the same pattern is followed from one stanza to the next. All right, so now let's look at stanzas 4, 5, and 6. Again, the second and fourth lines of each stanza become lines 1 and 3 in the next. And as the reader moves from one stanza to the next, he or she will find 2 new lines and 2 lines that repeat from the previous stanza. So, sprinkled with Peking dust, to dance in fields of mud, so young they'll never rust, proud as if of royal blood. So sprinkled with Peking dust and so young they'll never rust came from the previous stanza, but to dance in fields of mud and proud as if of royal blood are new lines, but then they will then repeat in the following paragraph, the following stanza, as the first and third lines. And there you'll see 2 new lines, or peel shrimp for pennies a day, and then coins and jade to put away. And then, of course, those 2 new lines in stanza 5 will repeat in stanza 6 as the first and third lines, and so on. So it's a little bit, it's like braiding, right? Okay, so then that is from the previous page. All right, so these are the last two stanzas in the poem. So let's look at stanzas 7 and 8, the last two quatrains in the poem. The same pattern continues, and the rhyme scheme is A, B, A, B within each stanza. So shore, free, more, three. That's an A, B, A, B pattern. Um, the stanza, if you look at stanza 6 above, day, shore, away, more. Again, A, B, A, B. In the final stanza, the second and fourth lines that are in, I put them in yellow, grandchildren for whom they long and grandmothers sing their song. Those two lines are from the first stanza, right? All the way back at the beginning of the poem, but in flipped order, right? Okay. So there's no quiz today, but instead what I'd like you to do is to try your hand at writing a poem in one of these forms, either villanelle, sestina, or pantoum. You don't have to write the whole thing today, but I'd like you to spend some time trying. And it really doesn't matter what you write about. One of the fun things about these formats is that you could write about anything. You could write about doing the dishes or about putting your socks on or just really about anything at all, as long as you are playing the game of following the rules for that form, right? So go back and look at the rules for the villanelle, the sestina, or the pantoum, and take a crack at it, right? And then what I'd like you to do is to write at least two stanzas today. And then I'm going to create a prompt for you in the journal space on Blackboard, and you can share your two stanzas with me there. I'll make it so it's private. Just, I don't know how you guys feel about letting other people see your rough draft poetry. So for now, I'll just put it in journals and let it be private. So that's your assignment today instead of a quiz, to try writing in one of these forms. To if you get inspired and you want to write the whole thing, that's wonderful. But I'd like to see at least two stanzas, and you have to please tell me which form you're using, whether it's the villanelle, the sestina, or the pantoum. And don't worry about making mistakes. It's okay. I just want you to try to be creative. And that's it. Try it. It's good for you to use your creativity. And I'm sure you're sick of taking quizzes too. All right. So jump right in. Okay. And that's it for this presentation.